I can start with a question to Marissa to kind of break the ice, who's going to be hopefully answering some folks' questions. I think we're going to have a mix of early stage sales leaders, some founders, some sales reps, folks on the CS side, folks interested in learning from how Marissa and Figma have kind of built this amazing sales assist motion on top of their product-led growth engine, and breaking up market into enterprise very quickly and successfully. So to start, maybe Marissa, what does buyer collaboration or working with customers in a collaborative way mean to you?
Yes, it is such a good question and timely for Figma, because collaboration is, if you're not familiar, Figma is a collaborative platform. Our mission is to help people collaborate visually. So collaboration has been at the core of everything we've done since the beginning. It's ingrained in how we hire. So we look for people who are collaborative. It's ingrained how we work internally and externally. And so it's a big part of the tools we buy, whether that's something like Accord, which we use, or we use FigJam, which is our whiteboarding product to collaborate with customers. And it's ingrained in our sales methodology, which we use command of the message. So it's really a part of everything we do. And something that's really interesting is our head of research just put out this new study that was saying that there is no universal standard for collaboration. Like, everyone actually wants something different. And so I think how we think about it on our team is meeting your customer where they are and making sure you're asking the right questions and being as customer centric as possible. So that's how we think about it at Figma. It's ever evolving. And I think the mindset of our team is really important. And then the tools that we use to empower our team along the way is also something we think about.
I love that answer. It's something that I've found it really hard to verbalize. And I really like that clip of, there is no, what does it mean to collaborate? It means something different for everyone, especially in a buyer journey. People are going to be at such different stages, right? Maybe they're like, hey, I heard about this thing. I don't know what it is. I want to learn about it. Maybe it is, hey, I'm actually evaluating this plus two other things. And that's kind of where I'm at. Or I know I want to use the thing. How do I go from wanting to use it to actually buying it, onboarding, et cetera? And it means, culturally, professionally, all that kind of stuff. I love that. Kind of meeting the customer where they are is, I think, a great definition of philosophically how you collaborate with folks. So thanks for kicking us off with that. And then now we're going to open it up to the crowd here. Feel free to add your questions here, or is there like a hand raisey type thing? Yeah, you can use that. Or if you're bold enough, just unmute yourself. We're all going to be in a conversation here for the next 30 or so minutes. Feel free to jump in with the first question, and we'll figure out how this collaborating is going to work on our first jam session as we move away from kind of some of those more stale webinar style sessions.
I can break the ice here.
Cool.
Hey everyone, thanks for taking my question. Marissa, I'm curious to know from you, having so much experience, with collaboration, how do you position collaboration to your customer? Do you have like a certain talk track you use, or how do you, just explain that this is, mutual and it's not like a one-sided thing that you're trying to push?
And in your mind, when you say collaboration with your customer, is there a specific part of the sales process you're thinking about, or is it just collaboration in general through the process?
Sort of was thinking about FigJam a little bit, and from my understanding, when you sell FigJam, it's sort of having the customer in FigJam and guiding them through that sales process while also using FigJam. And so I was just kind of curious as to how you just talk a customer through that process.
Yeah. So I think that we use the buzzword like customer centric or like customer first, but it really is so important that the whole point of a salesperson is to guide your customer to their desired end state so they can achieve the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And you are sort of their advisor or like tour guide to get them to understand the options out there and then hopefully purchase your solution at the end. So I think that for us, and I can talk about how we sell FigJam also if you want, but a mindset of how collaboration comes to life for us is the intent is, how can I understand my customer as best as possible? And if our solution is best to solve their needs, how can I guide them through this process? And I think the people that are seeing success at Figma are those that are empathetic and understanding, and also prescriptive, and using a tool like Accord, for example, to build a mutual plan where someone's bought into every step of the process is important. Ahead of that, you need to be bought in together on what you're trying to accomplish together. And so it's a lot around like, how do you ask the right questions? How do you have curiosity into what they're looking to solve? And as a salesperson coming across with credibility and building trust, I think all those things allow for collaboration to happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Marissa. And Brad, any follow-up to that before I can jump in with a couple cents?
No, that was an awesome answer. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think what I really like there is thinking about it first. What are they trying to accomplish before you get into even working together? Just trying to understand, hey, like, we're having this conversation. You're investing your valuable time to either, evaluate or try to purchase this thing. What are you trying to get out of it? And I think the job of a great salesperson, you can ask good questions and, be the expert, but I think being able to reframe what they're trying to accomplish better than they could have even come into the conversation with is always my goal of that first call, of that like discovery is, hey, can I play this back and help you better articulate what you're trying to solve? Because I help, hopefully, if you're the right fit, the right customer for us to work with, I'm going to probably be able to understand this small part of the world better than you will ever, because this is what I live in. So first being able to do that, then we get on to how are we going to work together? What's the game plan? Who needs to be involved, all those pieces. But first, what are we trying to do together? And being super curious. And I think a lot of people, especially maybe folks that are earlier in sales or selling a new product or at a new company, kind of jump into the later stuff. Like, this is why we're so good, or this is how we can help you. But like, how can you help them if you don't really deeply understand what they're trying to even do in the first place? And that's really, I think, where, like you said, Marissa, that's where that collaboration kind of begins.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, y'all. I love like the words like empathetic and like consultative when, especially like in the beginning, when you're trying to understand what the pain points are and building that credibility. So yeah, thank y'all.
Of course. Cool. Well, let's take another question. I know there's folks that have the video off if you want to jump in, but I also see Steve and Matt. I want to put you guys on the spot here, but that's just what I'm looking at. If you guys have any questions for myself or Marissa about effectively partnering with customers.
Steve, do you want to go? Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, still don't have yet. I'll let Steve go.
Classic headphones.
Oh, I don't know. We can't hear you, Steve, for some reason. But you have great headphones.
Get off.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Invest in the great headphones. Sorry about that, guys. And that could lead me into my question is, so this is actually my first role in more of a tech, remote, all things like that. Complete new product for me. So I guess in, jumping into it, having the sales experience into a complete new and different, industry, what are some of the tips you guys would have on getting, more familiar, jumping right into my vertical, let's say, and really honing in on what my clients or my ICPs are looking for and speaking their language, so to speak.
And what is your role there?
I'm an AE.
Nice.
So I'm an AE, but right now I'm still building lists, also calling out until I get an SDR doing it for me.
Nice. I'll take a stab and then would be curious what Ross has to say. I think it's great that you're here and asking that question, which says so much about you. For what I've seen of folks coming into Figma, and the folks we hire on the enterprise side are folks who've had experience in sales, but they don't necessarily have a background in design. So in some ways, they're similar to you in that they're new to the industry. They're familiar with sales, so they have a little bit of a foundation. And so, but there's always more you can learn about sales forever too. And I'd say what they've done well is they learn the industry. What are people talking about? What are trends that's happening in this space today? You want to sound informed to your customers. So we know in the design space, for example, that there's what is being coined the decade of design, and that design is more important than ever before. And so our team needs to know that. And then we also know that hiring is a big priority for chief design officers. So those things, like what does the C-level think about in your industry and what are trends happening today at a macro level is really important. And then I think as you think about your book of accounts, you probably want to prioritize like, what are my top 10 accounts? What are my top 25 accounts, depending on your segment? And then you might want to go deep into like account planning and what's the priority for that business in the context of like the overall industry. So that's like one bucket. And then you probably have a bucket on like learning your product itself and maybe why the product was built and why those features, what problems are those things solving? And what is the value it delivers to your customer and tying it back to the value. And then there's like the sales acumen bucket, which is probably rooted in some type of methodology you're following. And then I think the reps that do really well on our team are just like infinitely curious. So it's what questions do I want to ask? And coming to every call with a plan and an intended outcome. And if you can do those things, you'll probably be in a good place and you'll ramp a little bit faster.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, that was 100 times better answer than I could have ever come up with. But I think the things maybe that I can plus one that I heard that I think will put you in a position, or anyone in a position that, can easily be kind of the top 5% of any team. The things that I heard: teach your customer something. Again, they work on 100 things a day, 1,000 things a week. You are the expert in this one area that you can help solve a problem. I think a lot of people coming into a new space don't necessarily have the confidence right away to feel like they're there, but you can be there because, again, this is the thing that this is all the stuff that your company is teaching, that all the resources that you have, the research you can do. You can be someone who can have a great conversation with someone about the thing that you're helping with. And again, to Marissa's point, try to have it not necessarily about like how to do the thing, but what's going on in the space. And that's going to put you at just such a better, rapport building and just like ability to have this conversation for someone to potentially work with you. And, especially early on when they're considering, do I even spend time with this person, having this initial conversation. So yeah, totally agree there. And I think, again, like what I feel from a lot of reps is this lack of confidence there. So trust that you can quickly become that expert. And I think overall, in terms of the sales acumen, the methodology, how you work with customers, the plan, the word proactive to me is like number 1, 2, and 3. Like, always think about, before any interaction, like, how can you do one more thing? How can you, get the touch point in from your manager and executive on a potential deal early on, versus just when you need that contract signed? How do you send that email the day before a meeting, even if it's a first or second meeting? Hey, this is what we're planning on going through. Anything you want to add to get most out of it? The quick follow-up right after. If you set the meeting, even if think of it's 5 or 7 business days out, you need to have a touch point in between. Hey, had a great chat. This is what we went through. Send them something that might be valuable based on that conversation, or thinking about our next meeting. This is what, I'd love to go through. I'd love to get your thoughts before. I think all those little things are the difference between that 70, 80% of quota and that standard rep on the team, or that consistent A+ player who is doing 150, 200% every quarter. And it's not rocket science. It's not like you need to be the smoothest talker. To me, those are the little things that go so far. And like Marissa said, the fact that, whoever else is on this call are going to listen to it after, hopefully those are the folks that are going to be getting that, 1%, 2% better every day. So yeah, totally agree, Marissa, on all that stuff.
Thank you. Awesome. That's awesome.
And maybe to tie it all back together to the first point of like confidence, people feel like you're taking up their inbox space, or like these things are annoying. They're not. Just another human on the other end. As long as you approach it friendly, hey, just trying to, no need to respond if, it's all good. Getting in those touch points without the asks, I think are, definitely the way to build great relationships with folks. So hopefully that's helpful, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. So I saw a couple chats in here to Kevin, sorry. I have a question. If you're approaching a sale to a large enterprise, when getting approval from IT InfoSec is required, for the sale to move forward, how do you think about including IT and InfoSec in the sales process? It's a great question. At what point do you involve them in the conversation? Do you get in touch with them in advance, even before the decision maker has asked to move things forward? Marissa, as Senior Manager in Enterprise Sales at Figma, I would love to get your thoughts on the dangerous world of InfoSec and the paper process when you're trying to build a business case, you're trying to work with these stakeholders and get the deal done. How do you deal with the stuff that can potentially kill it or slow it down, like InfoSec and RT?
Kevin, it is such a good question and hits home viscerally for me and the team. I think the ideal and what we try to do, all of this is rooted in how strong was your discovery with your customer. And ideally, you have a champion who is helping you see the business value you can provide to them. And you've aligned on a critical event that they're trying to work towards. And so if you've done the discovery in a really good way, then you have understood what is the current scenario and the impact of what happens if they stay there. You know the future scenario and what are the positive business outcomes if they go there. And you know that your product is going to help them see their promised land and nirvana state. And ideally, you know what's at risk if they don't move forward by a certain date. And if you have that, you can coach your champion and say, hey, if you want to hit this deadline, let's work backwards. We need to start security and legal now. And so let's work in parallel with also getting the sign off so we can get this done by this timeline. And there are some things you can do, like put them on a trial. For Figma, at least that's something really big for us, where a trial could be 30 to 45 days. And we say, hey, let's parallel track the legal and security review. So by the time the trial ends, we can move into full production. That's the ideal state. And that happens in advance of officially removing forward from a decision maker. That said, there are definitely customers that say we can't do that. Like we have to validate that this is something we want to move forward with before we start legal and security. And so if that's the case, we're just very realistic around what do you need to see in what time frame so that we can then start legal and security. And you're coaching your champion on this is what this means. And you, from experience, you can say, legal is going to take, based off of your company and what we're thinking about, what we've seen with other customers, this is going to take us 90 days. Are you prepared for this to launch in September? And try to help them see around the corner. And then maybe they could get an exception for you to start something sooner, even if typically they have to wait until there's this DM sign off. So that's how we think about it. It's not perfect. We try to make it towards our ideal state of like working it in parallel before a sign off, but sometimes it happens where we do have to wait.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer in terms of going back to the theme of this session of buyer collaboration. It's all about how you frame it. It's the first conversation you had, going back to Marissa's first answer, you're trying to figure out what they're trying to accomplish. Any question related to the deal, how do we do this, that goes back to, okay, they're trying to accomplish this. How can you put yourself in their mind and add value in what you're trying to do, which is, hey, I want to get this deal done ASAP, right? That's the best thing for my team. How can that be best for them? Hey, when do you need this launch? Would it be better if we get this done in July versus August? Because you're trying to solve this real problem. Maybe it isn't. Maybe, hey, the deadline for this thing doesn't start till then, so it's cool. Okay. So then maybe we don't need to do it in parallel, but just always going back to what they're trying to accomplish. And then, yeah, I love that. What was the critical date? What was the language that you used?
A critical event. Yeah.
Yeah, critical event, right? Because how do you add urgency, or another way of framing it, like help them get this thing done in a reasonable amount of time? You need to rely on something big at the company. And what I always like to think about when it comes to those dates, I think Skip Miller, one of my favorite sales trainers, calls it the I date. You need to be a small part of a big problem. And this is really counterintuitive, but if it's a small problem and you're the whole solution of it, it's easy for that to get deprioritized and that date to get pushed back. But if you're even a small part of a really big thing that's getting done at the company, that's never going to slip because it's their biggest priority at the company. And again, it's super counterintuitive. And I think a lot of people look for, hey, we're going to solve this whole thing, you're going to get done by this date. And that inevitably slips and slips and slips. And it's funny, again, when you go to, we're just going to be this key piece in this overarching thing that you're doing, very rarely is that going to get pushed back. Seeing a bunch of other questions. See in the Q&A here, when using a cord during a sales call, how do you overcome the resistance of a contact on the call to invite a decision maker through email on a cord? Well, I'm going to maybe make this partly about cord, but like we're going to open this up into, hey, if you did what Marissa said, you had a couple conversations with them and you have this key date that they're working towards, and the person you're working with, let's call it the champion, has another decision maker. How do you make sure that you involve the decision maker on that game plan? So it's not just up to this maybe mid-level person or low-level person that this thing slips, right? You want it to be the key person in charge of this big project. How I like to do it is probably exactly like Marissa said, which is, hey, what we usually find is this person needs sign off. If they're not involved in the conversation early, they're not going to have the context. It's going to be really hard for us to get this done together. And then that's kind of how I'd frame it. I probably wouldn't invite them cold into any document, into any email thread without an introduction. And I'd always try to ask for that call. Hey, can we do a group call? Can we share the context with them live? You know, happy to help you with this so you don't have to, you know, build anything. And if they won't invite you, which is common, even if they say no, create a one-page doc or a few sentences and bullets that try to summarize it from your perspective. Because again, you're the expert in this thing and solving this problem. You need to own that narrative. You can't rely on even the best champion who's bought this thing before to sell for you. But so that's my thought. Marissa, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how do you make sure you can loop in the right key decision makers early in the process?
Yeah, I think if you have the champion that wants your product and they're still resistant to invite their decision maker, one, I think that's a tell. But two, maybe if you really have a champion, it is asked just like having curiosity around that. Like, tell me more about why you don't want to invite XYZ to this. And maybe it is an education process of explaining why that person needs to be involved. And no one wants to feel like they're not important. So there could be like, well, I don't need to bring in my boss. And maybe they actually don't need to bring in their boss. Like maybe like the CEO doesn't need to be involved in this conversation type thing. And we just signed a deal today and the VP of product was involved in email and we kept pushing for a call. And ultimately the director of product was able to get it done and got it done on our timeline or on our mutual timeline. And so I think but we asked the question and we knew we had a strong champion. So I think that also I love what you said, Ross. And I also think you could ask some questions to uncover more. And just remember, like your customer might be new in buying something. So sometimes it just takes you educating them on how they can get this done on their timeline.
Yeah, I think I like that going back to, I think a lot of people will go to objection handling and like, no, but this is like, I like that. I'm going to do that the next time too. Is, hey, what we normally do is the next meeting, we'll loop in this person. Like, oh no, I think it's fine. Like, cool, like totally fine if you handle it the way that you think you know your company best, but curious like why you think it might not be helpful. And then maybe they position, you know, I've brought in vendors before and I don't trust them with this thing. And you know, the bar for B2B sales is not very high, as we all know. So I think there's some of that to work through. And that's again why I like the give of, hey, this is what I was thinking. And you come to them with a more detailed outline of not just saying, hey, we'd love to loop in this person. It's like, give them the why, give them what you're going to do with them. If it's someone more senior, they're rightfully trying to protect their time and their reputation with the company. So if you can make them look even better versus worse, that's when they're going to probably loop in this person. Hey, put together this report. I wanted to get your thoughts. If we were to do something, this is what we normally go through. And then be like, oh shit, this is great. This totally relates to the big thing that we're trying to do in my company. And I'm going to look awesome in front of, you know, this VP. So that's also another way of looking at it.
Yeah. There's a great book called Questions That Sell that I just finished on Audible. It's like 6 hours. And it's a great read for how you can approach different scenarios, the questions you can ask. And one of them was like getting stuck below your decision maker, and then questions you can ask. So if anyone is interested in a book, highly recommend it.
Sweet. Adrian Mar, if you don't mind, we can maybe drop that in the chat here. I'm definitely going to click on that link if we do. I'm going to check that out because yes, questions are the key to sales. Awesome. Speaking of which, we got about 10 minutes left. Any other folks have some questions for Marissa? Matt?
I'll jump in. Hi everybody. Hey Ross, your team has been awesome, by the way. They've been trying to sell me on Accord for a while. I love the love it. I love it. And we've just been waiting to kind of grow up to get into it. I feel like a kid that's been
Awesome.
invited to the adults table a little bit. I run just a 2-man startup, but we're often in like David and Goliath scenarios, where like we're in customer trials right now, with 4 federal level governments around the world, and also a Fortune 500 as well. We're kind of doing like a pivot expansion thing by accident, and we're just drinking from a fire hose. And like I'm not I'm not in sales at all, so I apologize. But Marissa, by the way, like we're also, our app next to our cloud, it's all being designed in FigJam and everything. So yeah, like this is just so cool. Yeah, we're just like I said, we're so unseasoned in terms of sales, and like we're trying to live into like the Accord model of like building a mutual plan and that kind of thing. Like we're experiencing so many surprises, and like every government has a different procurement process, and we're getting like, I guess like my question is like, how do you build like an initial common plan that has like those signposts that would be common to, I mean, there's only so many governments in the world, but how do you build that like initial common plan, and then how do you revisit it with your champion? And because like we're just seeing so many surprises that didn't come out during the initial discovery, and we're just feeling like, you know, we passed, for example, we had a surprise meeting yesterday with the data and privacy attorney with the US federal government, which we passed, which was really cool. And then they're like, okay, we're going to kick you down to this other team. And it's like, okay, well, that wasn't like part of the plan. So how do we like carefully revisit that, like with our champion? Like, is that the best thing to do? Or I would just kind of love to hear your thoughts there, if you did have any advice.
I can share some thoughts and then curious Ross's take. One, it's a very challenging space you're in, and there's probably some similarities, but maybe each organization also has their own things. And so I'm hearing 2 things. One is like, how do you get ahead of surprises? And then how do you revisit that maybe? And then the other is like, how do you build a playbook? Taking the first one first, I think the worst thing for a customer is you not being aligned on their process and what they need to do. And we just had this happen for us. We were not in lockstep with our customer. And so when we're following up and saying, hey, what's next? Are we going to hear back from your team? When can we sign? It's very frustrating for them, because for them, they're going through their process and we don't know that. We don't know what they're going through, and it's our job to know. And so I think it's very fair for you to slow down, to speed up and say, hey, I think we are misaligned, and I apologize. I take this on myself. It's my job to know your process and help guide you through it from my end and bring to the table what you need. Can we take a step back and actually map out what this looks like for you? And if you use FigJam, like we've used FigJam to map out a process and like literally like, what does it look like? We personally like Accord for the actual, like, what is the plan? Because it's very structured. You can assign owners and dates. So there's a way you can kind of play with both, or you could, it sounds like you have Accord, so you could just do it in there too. But I definitely think you should slow down and realign. And that shows that you're about the customer, because it's much more frustrating for you to not know when they are expecting you to know. So I do think that's okay. And we just practiced this this week. Yesterday, one of the reps on my team did this. And he's like, I realized I don't know some of these things. Do you mind if we take a step back and actually realign on XYZ? And the customer thanked him, and he learned so much information. So
amazing.
Definitely have confidence in that. And it shows you're there for the customer, not to get a deal done. And so that's the first part. I'll pause on that, but that's how I'd approach that first part.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think like the customers that are like our internal champions, they all want to buy but I think they're also surprised by like the internal process because like the data privacy lawyer was like, well, they're good, but we need to kick you down to like these people in procurement. You know, I'm picture this like shadowy back office, and and that was a surprise to our champion. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, is to be empathetic to like what the champion's going through. They're trying to navigate that, and we don't know. That's what we say, like whenever we hit a hiccup, is like we don't know what their battle is that they're fighting internally. And like they literally got a text message from the privacy attorney like like during the call, because he left a little bit early, and he's like, they're like, oh, we need to send you here. And it's like, okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's super interesting. I really appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Yeah. One other thing I'll say is when we encountered this with a really large organization, Q1, we had started legal in August of last year, and we were with our champions, and we were spinning wheels through December. And in December, we got an executive sponsor who actually knew the process.
Okay.
And then we were able to close it in Q1. And so we learned that you cannot, like, a champion is critical, but for a very complex organization, you need someone who's bought something before, and you need that executive. So it could be you asking your champion for that person, like, hey, it seems like there's a lot of unknowns here. How can we elevate this conversation and someone help guide us for what's ahead? Because it sounds like you all want this by X date, and I'd love to help support you in that, but it would be helpful to know kind of what's left for us to complete, and see if they can introduce you to a more senior person.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And just to get tactical about, like, I think some good ways of how to do that. It's really hard to do when it's later in the deal. If you don't set the expectations from day one, and because they're trusting you, right? They're putting their social capital out there and their valuable time and effort at the company to work with you on it, despite, obviously they're doing it because they want to get this thing done. I think it's really hard to come back to someone and be like, hey, now we need this. I think starting it and saying, hey, like, this is how we're going to work together. I can help you with all these things. And then at this point, we, through, whatever, work at this, like, crazy thing, you can make a joke about it. Like, to get anything done, you need someone to understand who's able to, like, grease the wheels. Who do you think is gonna be the best person for that? And how can I help and support, instead of you saying, like, I'm going to get to this person, like, how can I help support you in making that business case and all that kind of stuff? So it doesn't become like, how do I get there? But like, how do I support you in you looking great and making this thing happen? But again, this word that we've been using at Accord, like, about our deals, is we're going up market. Buyer fatigue comes up. And I think once you have this, the classic time kills all deals, once you've been through it a bit and you're spinning your wheels, like Marissa said, that kicks in. And it's really hard to get asks in and do different things once you kind of have this buyer fatigue, and that stoke level continues to drop week over week when you might not be getting things done, or you're further from that initial outreach. So the more that you can front load and set those expectations and then get those wins along the way, even if it's a long sales process, but it feels like you're getting these things done, that's how you're going to increase that over time, versus, again, develop that fatigue over time. So hopefully some helpful things to think about.
Super, super helpful. Thanks so much for the session, and thanks for the answers. Really appreciate it.
Of course. I think we might have time. Oh, sorry, go for it.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, Mahir asked a question in the chat here about, I think, finding a different champion at the company when the original might not be the best for selling into.
Yeah, here's the question. I can quickly just pre-read it for everyone. Marissa, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Topic of champions, I have a question. In the case where the original point of contact, the company might not be the right product champion because of the seniority or busy schedule, what's the best way to navigate and find another champion at the company? Is this a process that should be started from scratch, or is there a better way to go about doing this? That's a great question for Marissa, because I know she's a champion of multi-threading, and it's not just one person, but getting as many people into the process as you can, which I am too. So Marissa, love to get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, and if I'm reading that in the right way, it sounds like there might be a specific scenario you have in your head, and it's a very nuanced question, but it's definitely one that we've encountered a lot at Figma. I think that one thing is there's a difference between a champion and a coach and an executive sponsor. Like all three of those are very different. If you have a coach, this is someone who's like really interested in your product, but they don't really carry any influence, and they're probably not going to get anything done for you. And for us, I think we've gotten ourselves into trouble when we think we have a champion, but they're actually a coach. They're not going to help get our deal done. An executive sponsor is someone who is an executive at the highest of levels that has, or an economic buyer if you're using Medic, and they have the discretionary funds to spend money on your product, and they're going to sign the contract. And then a champion is someone who is basically working as your person on the company side to help get this deal done. And so it could be you don't actually have a champion, depending on the scenario. But the other is, I definitely think it's fair to multi-thread, and depending on the scenario, you might start from scratch. It could look like a LinkedIn message to, hey, we've been working with other folks at your company, would love to see how you play a part in the process. It could be like your manager sending a note to someone senior at their company and saying, I understand our teams have been working together, would love to align on your vision for X in 2022. Like there's ways you can tactically try to get around someone. But if you are finding that this person isn't responsive to you, then yes, absolutely, go find other people and use your in terms of a collaborative buying process, like lean on your internal team to help you do outreach, and then find new champions at the company is what we've seen work for us.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd add to that before we jump off, and yes, you're welcome, would be don't be shy. Like no one's, if you approach it in the right way, no one's going to yell at you. I think it's happened twice in my career of doing sales over the last 8 or 9 years, and both of them were not deals. Like, and it was a huge signal, like Marissa said even before, like it's a signal to, like, if you're trying to do the right thing, get the deal done and support your customer, and it ends up backfiring, it's probably not a deal. So yeah, just try to get out there, build as many, have as many productive conversations as possible. Try to do it early on, yes, so you don't get cemented into this one. They feel like you've built this really great relationship and haven't been doing that already. Make it standard. I love the idea of multi-level intros as well. Even if you're a small team of, of 10, 50 people, there's going to be someone in a different aspect that's going to be able to approach. Maybe it's the product leader. Maybe it's, it's your, head of product or CTO that's going to reach out to the right stakeholder on the technical side. Maybe it's your CEO or some business stakeholder that's going to be able to reach out to the other person. It takes 2 seconds to draft a note for someone, for them to edit it and then send off. Even on LinkedIn is a great place that feels more casual, more like that text and friendly kind of thing. So yeah, dive in, experiment.
Good question. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a really good question.
Well, to wrap up, this time flew by. I was a fan of this format. Hopefully other folks were, and huge thank you to Marissa for taking her valuable time, growing team, new products launching, FigJam, Figma Enterprise, a lot of learning. So appreciate you sharing it with the whole community here, Marissa.
Oh, of course. Thank you for coming, asking questions. This was so much fun. I loved this, and good luck to everyone, and feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if I can help with anything. I'm around.
Awesome. Take it easy, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.